You start? Okay, might we start? Or? Okay, so welcome everyone. Today we will try to be really informal and try to engage you because here inside among you we have a lot of, between you we have a lot of journalists who are really change makers because media are creating what we perceive somehow, right? So having the right news, having the freedom of expression in the news is important. Here we have with us Mr. Who was the spokesperson for the Paris Agreement. So he has something to tell what was happening in the last 7 years, because now he joined another program, a television or a media, called We Don't Have Time. So we don't have time, Nick. Please tell us why.
Well, not really. I've got to go now because I don't have time. So thanks very much indeed, Max. See you. Bye. No, that was a joke. If you spot any other jokes, let me know. Nice to see so many familiar faces. Nice to see James and still working on this really excellent project. I know, Zangi, you're here as well. It's like a party, isn't it? And some newer faces too, but you, and you, and you, and you, and you. I mean, it's great. Over the years, I think we've all bumped into each other. I was a journalist for 13 years on the Times newspaper in London, covering the environment and science in the 1990s, so I've done a bit of that. I was director of comms of the UNEP and then the UNFCCC, and now, as Max kindly said, work for a Swedish-based broadcaster called We Don't Have Time. We're just over there in the Nature Pavilion. What I want to talk about. I don't know if you get the feeling when you pick up the newspaper or listen to the radio, watch the TV right now, that if you blindfolded yourself, or maybe if you basically, closed your eyes and you listened to it, you could be 20 years ago. You know, world's coming to end. I mean, that's the shorthand. New science report says we've only got 3 minutes and 40 seconds before everything implodes. I mean, it's all true, right? I mean, the science is the science. It's all absolutely the way it's gonna unfold if we don't act. But you only rarely get, and often it's a bit niche, the rather interesting and rather positive things that are happening. You know, renewable energy, doubling every, 2.5 years, every 3 years, maybe a little bit of a going backwards in Europe in terms of speed because of the Ukraine war. You always get these politics, shit happens, as people say. But that's really unbelievable. How many people in the world know? If I say to people that I know, I say renewable energy is doubling every 2.5, 3 years, and it's going to meet its part of the Paris Agreement, people go, wow, wow. And then they go, yeah, but they don't look very nice, those wind turbines. I say, yeah, that's why they're putting them all out at sea now. So what do we do about this? Because we all know, don't we, that if we're going to pass our exams, we have to believe we can get a good grade at university. If we're going to swim a river, we have to believe we can make it to the other side. I used this thing the other day because I've been reading a Stephen King novel called Something Summers, which is about a sniper, actually. It's a very good book. You should read it, but maybe I shouldn't use the phrase, if you believe you are, with one shot, you have to hit a target. You've got to believe that you can hit that target. And if we are so paralyzed by fear and so paralyzed by negativity, we can't believe that we can actually deal with climate change. If we can't believe that we can push that stone up the mountain and the mountain peak is not so far and it's going to roll down the other side very quickly, if only we make that extra push, we are not going to solve climate change. It's simply not going to happen. We are going to consign ourselves as a society to a very grim future, just as the science says, if we don't get more confident. So, and with We Don't Have Time, but also Exponential Roadmap. Anybody know the Exponential Roadmap? Those are the scientists in Sweden, like Johan Rockström, who's probably the rock star of climate science these days. And we just launched a little campaign the other day, borrowing from the Second World War, which was another big headache that needed resolving by a sense of ambition and a sense of can-do. Not a sense of if we can do it, if we can win the Second World War, but we shall win the Second World War. And the whole world came together pretty much. And we will beat climate change if we come together and we take the same spirit as this fantastic icon from the Second World War shows. We can do it. The question is, will the journalists do that? How are we going to sell stories to the global public that really make you want to, it makes people's heart beat and they can join this? And that's, I suppose, the only reason I'm here, because I have to go and broadcast over there. But I know that you do write positive stories. I used to write positive stories. Editors sometimes don't like positive stories. They go, that's a bit too positive. You know, haven't we got some cats stuck up a tree as a result of climate change that can't get down? I mean, you know, that's what editors want. But sometimes you have to fight it. But I think unless we bring positivity to this, and, you know, real, and tell the science, of course. Why do we have to do it? But the rest of it is just waiting around for the world come to the end. Yeah? Okay. Thanks very much indeed. Bye.
Thank you, Nick. Thank you for your time. You are really a rock star. So while Nick is as a rock star distributing chocolate, before having here the journalists in presence, we have two persons that were not able to travel at the last second. Here you have Mr. Riccardo Grassi. He will introduce him by himself, but he's an old, not because he's old, he's really young inside, but he's a real history of journalism. Working for years for the freedom of expression that was funding a new platform which is called Citizen Platform for Climate Change by UNESCO. And we will have together with him another person from UNESCO that he will introduce. So Riccardo, let's try to see if we are able to listen and please tell us, you will close the game today, so it will be all the day long with us, all these 2 hours together with us. But I would like to say something regarding the next speaker that was sending this video message from UNESCO. Please, Riccardo.
Well, hello everyone. Very happy to be here, though I would prefer to be there, but it was impossible. I'm still positive, so that's what happens, and plans are changed beyond our will. So, well, thank you for the introduction, Max. We have prepared for this brainstorming encounter a very short clip that refers to a much longer video that focuses on solutions. The intention was and is, because it's just the beginning of a series, to curb a doom mood that disinformation and fake news are creating and try to create. So we had an idea, bringing science in, and women scientists in particular, to feature briefly existing solutions to concrete problems. One solution featured by one scientist worldwide. So we moved forward with the idea, and there was an immediate positive reaction from scientist organizations, and that's where we are. I mean, this will go on, and for the spirit of the Citizens Platform we have co-founded 2 years ago with the UNESCO Communication and Information Sector as our main supporter, this independent initiative has a simple editorial policy. Not to insist on pointing the finger on the bad things, on the bad people, on the horrible corporations, because that is already done by many organizations of different sort that are very important and that they have a media component, let's say. Well, we are information and communication in itself. It's not collateral to any other activity. And we thought that it was fundamental to be able to offer accurate information, I mean science-based information, to cover and show solutions and best practices. And now comes a very important element that is one of the main things in COP27, which is transparency and accountability from the governmental side. There's an enormous gap on that. But I will refer to this probably later at the end, where I was asked very generously to put together conclusions of the debate. And perhaps, Max, you can just show the clip. And in all this, I mean, for us, and this is a main point of what we are building or trying to build with UNESCO, is what we call climate change communication convergence, which means acknowledging that competing makes no sense, but that coming together would multiply dissemination and impact, and also local impact, because things happen locally. Change is built locally. And to do this convergence means that each one keeps its own identity and policies, its own contents, but we just create a mechanism that will empower each one and multiply the dissemination of proper contents and policies and gain impact.
Ricardo, what about...
This is for now.
Sorry,
Max?
Justice. What about introducing Mr. Guillermo?
Well, no, after we show the clip, well, Mr. Guillermo Canela de Souza from UNESCO, he is in the UNESCO's communication and information sector, the head of freedom of expression and safety of journalists, which is something that is absolutely linked to what we are considering today and on our work every day as journalists, reporters, editors, and media managers. So Guillermo wanted to be there in presence. Again, it was not possible, but he has recorded a 5 minutes video that I think is very good and very pertinent also for the brainstorming today.
Okay, thank you, Ricardo. Sorry, but now we'll show this 5 minutes video, which should open, we hope, the discussion. So please, from our director, may send the long video, 5 minutes, by UNESCO, freedom of expression, and soon later, James will introduce what health journalists are doing. So,
June mood. Many are feeling hopeless about climate change. June mood.
It's okay. It's okay.
Hello everyone, my name is Guilherme Canella and I'm the head of the Freedom of Expression and Safety of Journalists section at UNESCO headquarters in Paris. It's a pleasure to share a few thoughts with you about this very important and challenging topic of the role of the news media in addressing the climate emergency. Apologies for doing this via video message. As you can imagine, I would have preferred to be with you in person. On a personal note, I started working with these issues even before joining UNESCO more than 15 years ago, by coordinating a research on how more than 50 Brazilian newspapers covered at that time climate change issues. 15 years later, we have good news and bad news. The good ones first. The news coverage, particularly the specialized one, has evolved a lot positively, assisting the different players to understand better what is at stake. The bad news. Several of the problems identified 15 years ago remain, and new ones have been added to this discussion. So a free, independent and pluralistic media is a key piece of the puzzle to address the climate emergency. We need independent journalists to at least 4 crucial roles. First, holding the powerful accountable. Governments, fossil fuel companies, UN organizations, internet companies, whoever has an interest, legitimate or not, in addressing this crisis or trying to stop the processes to address it. Second, digging deeper on the policies that are necessary to address this crisis. Public policies, but also policies coming from the private sector and other relevant stakeholders. Journalists must shed light on what's going on in terms of policy making and policy execution. Following the money is essential here. 3. Unpacking complex scientific discoveries to the general public. Journalists must help to bring context to this discussion, further explain the consequences of taking action and of not taking action, and particularly connecting these consequences with areas of our lives that go far beyond the climate aspects, migrations, hunger, violence, etc. Fourth, debunking disinformation and misinformation and going deeper in explaining the structures that amplify and fund the waves of disinformation and misinformation and conspiracy theories regarding the climate emergency. Oof, this is a lot, I know. And all of this must take place in a scenario where media is struggling to survive, financially speaking, and to exercise journalism in a safer manner. More and more journalists covering environmental issues are subject to all kinds of violence, including murder, as we have been witnessing, unfortunately. For that, we do need to understand that journalism is a public good that should be protected and empowered. More resources are urgently needed, financial, but also knowledge, safety mechanisms, including prevention, protection, and prosecution elements. Support to navigate the complex web of disinformation, misinformation, and conspiracy theories are some of those resources. Although UNESCO is already implementing different multilateral policies trying to address these issues, we need to do more, a lot more. Therefore, we welcome discussions like these, and we are more than open to receive your recommendations, your ideas on how we can together tackle such a huge and urgent existential challenge. Thank you very much.
So, I don't know what's happening behind. There is a nice television. James, this is your...
Max, excuse me, Max. I would like to introduce, after Guilherme's intervention, Adeline Ulan from UNESCO Communication and Information Sector that has been asked by Guilherme and her sector to remain with us during all this brainstorming activity.
Okay, so she is following us during your talk. So please, James.
Exactly.
Hi, everyone, and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. Thanks for having me. Indeed, working with Guillaume and following on the great work that media are doing on climate change issues. Thanks a lot. And happy to respond to some question, if any, as well, on UNESCO site.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Max, and to the Earth Day team for hosting us this afternoon. It promises to be a very fascinating discussion on climate journalism and climate education. So my name is James Fahn. I'm the executive director of the Earth Journalism Network. We are a project of Internews, the global media development organization. And we're also a global community of over 15,000 journalists around the world, all dedicated to improving coverage of climate and environmental issues. So I've been a journalist now for over 30 years covering climate change, but I'm also a climate educator, as it turns out. I teach a class every year at the UC Berkeley Graduate School of Journalism, a class called Earth Journalism. And every year we have young journalists learning about climate change and biodiversity and how to cover these issues. And it's becoming more and more popular every year. We get more and more demand from students to learn how to report on these issues, which is very encouraging. But it occurs to me that all of us journalists, in a way, are educators. We don't really call ourselves that. We don't like to think of ourselves maybe as educating our audiences. We inform our audiences, but we're also students in a way. One of the really great things about journalism is that every day we get to go out, we talk to fascinating people doing amazing things, and we learn about it, and then we try and explain that to our audiences. So it's really a privilege, I think, for us as journalists to be both students and educators in our daily lives. They say journalists are the first recorders of history. Well, we're also some of the early educators of the public. But why are we here today? We're here because one of our most high-profile projects at the Earth Journalism Network is a partnership called the Climate Change Media Partnership. And this partnership has brought journalists, mostly from low and middle income countries, to the climate COPs ever since 2007. So for 15 years now, we brought over 400 journalists to the climate COPs. For the last 5 years or so, we've been privileged to partner with the Stanley Center. Devin Terrell is over there in the corner. If you ever want to learn more about the Stanley Center for Peace and Security, they're a great organization, and it's really been a pleasure to work with them. We're also very pleased to be supported by the Swedish International Development Agency and the Robert Bosch Stiftung, which has allowed us to be here this year. So we have with us this year over 20 journalists from low and middle income countries, and we're going to hear from them about how they go about covering climate change, how they learn about climate change, how they learn about reporting. And first off, we're going to ask Imelda Abano and Florence Armin to come up on the stage. These are two of our very best trainers at the Earth Journalism Network and the Climate Change Media Partnership. They're actually both senior content coordinators with EJN. Imelda is from the Philippines. Florence is from Indonesia. And they're going to start off to talk about how they go about training. So we don't really call ourselves educators. We talk more about training, capacity building, but it's really kind of a similar thing. So Imelda, please take it away.
Thanks, James, and thanks everyone for being here with us today. So while reporting to the public on climate-related issues requires journalists to be equipped with technical contents, apart from, of course, the highlighting the human dimension of climate change, and to make it more like credible, accessible, and engaging. So in the Philippines, we are no strangers in covering climate change because we have all those extreme weather events. We have a volcanic eruption, rising seas, droughts, name it, we have it in the Philippines. And telling stories is a powerful way of making the people aware on these issues, especially making the people prepared, and of course help the decision makers to decide on the plans ahead. So we try to equip journalists, the local journalists, for instance, bridging the gap between and among journalists, scientists, researchers, NGOs as well, so that we know the works of each other and then communicate so that after the workshops, we communicate and we have this, like, we build a network of resources as well. And then we form, of course, a network of environmental journalists in the Philippines, just like the other environmental networks in other countries, or the Association of Networks, of course, through the help of the Earth Journalism Network. So journalists collaborate each other, share resources, experiences, and of course, some opportunities as well. So we also do that in the Philippines. And then we partner with young journalists, Association of Young Journalists. We partner them with senior journalists, of course, to guide them on how to report effectively on environment or climate-related issues. And then the use of innovative tools is very important, especially on these days. The use of mobile journalism, TikTok, of course. In the Philippines, we love to report through TikTok. And that's apart from the traditional way of reporting using multimedia, graphics, drones, and etc. In our stories, we see to it that we highlight the vulnerable groups, the women, the youth, of course, the indigenous peoples, the children, and the persons with disabilities. This is through our learning field trips and or immersing ourselves in the communities, for example, in the coastal communities or in the farming communities, so that we can feel and we can see how they are adapting to the changing climate. And we have here, of course, the Climate Change Media Partnership at an international level with the EJN, the Earth Journalism Network, and the Stanley Center. So we bring these journalists at the international and big conferences like this to have them, like, follow the delegation and guide them through their reporting, and they report back to their countries as well. So I mean, we have a lot of things that we can do as journalists because we know that these kinds of topics, climate change, is really about people. Okay. Thanks, James.
Thank you, Himelda. Hi, everyone. So, in the context of Indonesia and the Philippines, there are many similarities in terms of geographical, population issues. But I would have to say that when it comes to climate reporting, Indonesia is not at the level where Philippines is. So, on the back of that situation, as well as dealing with a government that is growing to be more standoffish against science and scientists. So we do have to, collaboration is key issue for AJN to work locally in Indonesia. So we choose what we call strategic partners to find ways on how we can develop training or develop educational capacity building programs to help our journalists to I don't know, empower or to boost their interest in trying to cover climate issues in Indonesia. And it's because it's been so long, and I think this is not a unique situation with Indonesia, and I think a lot of countries are facing this, is that environmental issues have been reported in such a way that it is not connected with any other issues. It's not an economic issue, it's not an education issue, it's not a health issue. But now all that is changing, and we are very happy to say that we are making, small changes in trying to move the needle a little bit. And speaking of UNESCO, we did EJN together with UNESCO and the Society of Indonesia Journalists last year, because they launched, a couple of years ago, because they launched a climate reporting handbook. So it was kind of like a test for us, and we did bring representatives of journalists from, not just from Jakarta, the capital city, but journalists from other parts of Indonesia. This is also important to point out because such education and training opportunities regarding climate and environmental issues are very scarce outside of Jakarta. It's all Java-centric. Everything, donors, funders, they look immediately into Java. And that's when we realized that we need to dial back the talk and the capacity building of climate when it comes to journalists that are in the far-flung areas of Indonesia, in Sulawesi, in Papua, in Sumatra, and other islands in Indonesia. So collaboration is key, of course. Like Imelda said, our mentoring involve a collaboration between scientists, experts, and then senior journalists and the young journalists, just to bridge the gap so that for them to understand each other's work. And yeah, trying to work together to see how to make climate change is a relevant topic when it comes to information. Maybe I can give you an example, James. Like we recently did a training on air pollution in Jakarta, and what we did was, this training is part of a consortium on air pollution in India and in Indonesia. So we did a one-day workshop for them to build a rapport with the experts, and where the experts will be able to explain to them the science of air pollution, the sources of air pollution, terminologies, and try to break down the language a little bit, and with experts and think tanks. And then on the second day, what we did with them was we took them to a field trip. This field trip, we took them to an area that is impacted by air pollution the most. So this area is a slum in North Jakarta, where they are neighbors with a port that transports coal from various parts of Indonesia into Jakarta for the power plants surrounding the area. So they have to deal with the flying ash of coal, and so because air pollution issue has been reported in a way that it's all about the source, PM 2.5, how bad it is, or the policy, but rarely that they talk about, but why is it important for us to talk about air pollution? Why is it important? And how is this policy affecting the community? How helping the community to have a better life? So we took them to see these members of community who were more than happy to talk to journalists about their experience on everyday life, how they deal with the coal ash every single day, and how it's affecting the lives of their children. And so then, for the journalists themselves, they realize, okay, right, this is the story that we don't ever tell. It's always the headlines in the news is always about how bad the air pollution in Jakarta, how bad it's worsening, and the policy is not working, but it's never about the people. So I think immersing them and trying to bring them closer to the actual problem and the impacted location is important for the journalists themselves to see what's happening and how it's impacting them. I guess maybe I'll stop there, James.
Thank you, Flo. Thank you, Imelda. One quick question before you step down. We're talking about Earth journalists as change makers. We've spent a lot of time trying to document the impacts that journalism can have on policies, public debate. Can you share some examples from your own countries about stories in the Philippines and maybe Indonesia of how journalism stories have actually led to real impacts on the ground?
Yeah, thanks, James. So in the Philippines, I'll just cite one example. For instance, we had this workshop, and we wrote stories about our field trip in one of the coastal communities. That it's really very dirty coastal community. Then we had we do a clean drive into that, and we saw a lot of fishermen doing the dynamite fishing. So we wrote about all those things, and then after our stories came out, then the local government units imposed like a ban on dynamite fishing, and they had this regular cleanup already twice a month. So I think that's one of powerful stories how journalists can do to make some policy actions.
Flo, anything to add?
Yeah, I guess one example is that we work with a radio station in Indonesia on producing podcasts about climate change, and we decided to bring because this radio broadcast rebroadcast their content in 100 other radio stations, local community radio stations. So when we talk about community stations and radio stations, we need to bring climate change issues down a notch, make it relevant for the audience that are not in Jakarta but impacted by climate change. So we developed program, what they call the Climate Tale. Climate Tale, it talks about climate change and. So it's climate change and your everyday clothes, it's climate change and mental health, climate change and your makeup, climate change and your diet. We can contribute to that.
Thank you, Flo. So yeah, and there are just so many stories like this where a journalist produces a report, and for instance, in China, as a result of some stories, stepped in and shut down some illegally polluting factories. In Vietnam, a national park was saved from overdevelopment as a result of stories from a group of journalists in Hanoi. In Colombia, a story we commissioned on a road that was going to be cut through the Colombian Amazon eventually led to the government stepping in and canceling this road, which basically helped to save a stretch of rainforest. So example after example of journalists as change makers. So thank you very much, Imelda. Flo? And now we're going to call up some of our CCMP fellows, beginning with Christian de Azevedo Przybisky from OECO in Brazil, Paul Omarogbe from the Nigerian Tribune, and Tarushi Weerasinghe from the Sunday Times in Sri Lanka, and Nanga from Mongolia. Thank you so much for joining us and for all your work covering climate change. I'm going to turn it over first to Chris and to talk about her experience covering climate change both at home and here. Please, Chris.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for inviting me to be here. So I would like to tell you how fantastic is this work of journalism that we can at the same time teach and also learn. So I say 100% sure that I learn from every story that I write. And I've been writing about environment and climate change issues for the last 15 years. And lately we are having some problems because Bolsonaro came into power, as you may know. So I've been looking very closely for the last years in the problem of deforestation in Amazon. So it's because deforestation is today responsible for 49% of our emissions. Only Amazon, deforestation in Amazon forest is responsible for 77% of this 49%. So of course for us, looking at deforestation is, is our main topic. And we used to have official statement from the government every month to say how much Amazon forest had been put down in that month, or how much had been avoided, how much deforestation had been avoided. But when Bolsonaro came, he stopped doing that, and also he prohibited all the environmental official agencies to talk to the press. So for the last 4 years, it's been very hard for us to get any official statement. So what I did as a journalist, of course we had to continue reporting about climate change and deforestation. So I had to become a data journalist, actually, and I had to learn how to interpret and how to go through very difficult platforms, specific platforms that have those data. So I had to learn how to count, how to sum, the numbers of deforestation, the numbers of fires, to see each state of Amazon is responsible for how much deforestation and fires, and also to learn how to read satellite data to see what the spots are really burning, where are the critical parts of this. So that's it. I had to become a data journalist, basically. And I tell you that it's been a great, great experience because, as I said before, I learn from every piece that I write, and I absolutely love it. And just to give you an example about the results of my work there in Brazil, we have one state in Amazon that is called Rondônia, that is one of the biggest, where we have the biggest rates of deforestation. And we call the arc of deforestation, that deforestation is pushing, the natural areas, it's going deeper into Amazon. So Rondônia is now facing a huge problem. They have a local government that is not keen on environment and is doing everything that they can to extinguish natural protected areas. So I did a very deep report about that, and this report is being used to the public minister to file a lawsuit against Rondônia government. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you. I'm hoping we'll have time for questions, but first let's hear from the other speakers. Paul, please take it away.
Okay, so let me start by introducing myself. My name is Paul Omorogbe. I'm from Nigeria, and I write for the Nigerian Tribune. My story is really about responding to a need, and I'll start with myself. Very fun fact, I have a first degree in mathematics. So what I've been writing, just to respond to a need. So, like I said, I write for the Nigerian Tribune, and one interesting thing about newspapers in Nigeria is that we have beats, and the beats are property and environment. That's the closest that you get to reporting on environment. It's bundled. It's not environment separately. It's property and environment. So you have the real estate guy writing about real estate and property, and then once in a while he stumbles upon an environment-related story, and then he does it. And that's how it is. But real estate is money. People are more interested in money. So you get to see that the real estate and property pages are more about real estate and environment. So it was the same thing in my publication until sometime in 2013, when the desk I work with, the business desk, under which the real estate and property, property and environment beat is, decided to separate a page and dedicate it to environment. And so there was someone who was handling that beat, and she left, and then I came in. I was asked, and I felt it was a very great opportunity, and I came in. I took that opportunity because I have been passionate about things of this nature. Right from when I was a little child, I used to watch documentaries, and they would talk about things like climate change, and oh, what's that? It sounded cool in my ears, and now when I grew up, and I now find an opportunity to actually write about it, I grabbed it with both hands. And so I've been doing that since 2017, and it's been an interesting experience. In Nigeria, there's so many environmental issues, really. There are a lot. From plastic pollution, to oil spills, gas flaring, deforestation, there's so many, and flooding. And I'm sure that you'd have heard so much about the recent floodings in Nigeria. Yes, it came that close for me because my mother's hometown was completely flooded. I was shocked when I saw the pictures that came out, and it was that close. Before then, I had to report about a friend of mine whose village in the Delta State was completely flooded, and this was around 2018. And I was really feeling for her because all their livelihood was completely eroded. They have to go into the waters to start digging out cassava just so that it won't spoil. And that was it. So it's been really, really a personal, I've had some real personal encounters when it comes to carbon and environment. And then one thing that I noticed is this: there are few experts on climate change back home. And I actually realized that this is not for us alone, but there's a problem with the global south, a challenge with the global south, such that the Reuters Institute in the Oxford University had to just recently launch I think they call it a database for the global south for experts that journalists can quickly and easily consult. So that shows me that it wasn't just a local problem, but something that, we all encountered. And another funny thing is this, that many of these experts are not really social media or technology inclined, so it's not somebody you could just Google the name and then it comes up. You have to meet them at events, at programs, at workshops, and then you keep following up with them. And so that's been the experience for me, basically. I think I'll stop there. Thank you.
Hi everybody, my name is Tarushi Veerasinghe, and I'm a journalist from Sri Lanka. I've been covering climate change since I started journalism, but I've only been a journalist for 2.5 years because I started right out of high school. And one of the biggest challenges, apart from what my colleagues have spoken about with regards to finance and access to expertise, is the fact that I have struggled to make climate change something that my peers care about. Trying to get other 20-year-olds to care about the climate. And what I've come to realize is, so I work for a print news outlet, which means, the newspaper goes out every week. But at this point, I don't think even my mom reads it anymore. So it's been a struggle. So my first challenge was making sure that the audiences I wanted to get through to cared about the means I used to get my message through, and the EGN was actually so instrumental in that to me. I got to make my first documentary through a grant I received from them, and I actually got to cover one of Sri Lanka's biggest struggles. I think any low-income country has this issue where caring about the environment is concerned. You kind of get labeled as a people hater because the cost-benefit payoff of the development projects that occur in countries comes at the cost of the environment, and that is a sort of a scale that I've struggled with quite a lot. And so the documentary that I made was on certain large-scale constructions that were taking place in Sri Lanka that because of bad planning were resulting in irreversible environmental damage. And when I was researching for this story, when I was speaking to government officials, I've had government officials scream at me saying, you know, no, like our job is to make sure people are fed, not take care of the environment. And because of the, because like if I was to report this on print, I would not be able to express that sort of conflict as well as I was able to through my documentaries. So that was one of the challenges that I faced. With where climate journalism is concerned, I think in countries like Sri Lanka, getting people to care is a challenge, because from the government to the people, there are other priorities. You know, there are bigger issues to deal with, especially right now during an economic crisis with, you know, food inflation hitting 60% in a year. You know, it's hard to care about trees when your kid is starving. So that has been my challenge as a climate journalist, and how I have, being here has helped me so much, because I'm able to see how intricately connected even, you know, economic development is to the climate, and how the right climate strategies can actually save economies like Sri Lanka. The green economy concept is being incorporated into the Sri Lankan economic recovery plan, according to the president. But as a journalist, based on what I've seen, based on articles I've written, I mean, last year I covered the NDCs, and based on what I've seen, I am skeptical, because governments tend to try to just look good instead of actually do good, and that is something that the Sri Lankan government is definitely guilty of, where the climate is concerned. Because last year when they released their revised NDCs, there was a lot of lying on it, and I actually investigated, and I had to access inside sources in government offices through my editors, because obviously I don't have connections in high places. I've only been a journalist for 2 years, but we were able to investigate the fact that even though we say that we produce 35% renewable energy, that is not actually being used. So most of our energy comes from non-renewable sources. And now with the economic crisis, our primary energy source is going back to coal. So because of that, so my challenges have been that so far. But being at COP has helped me sort of make connections and talk to other countries, and sort of shift my focus from just highlighting the issues to also solutions journalism, which has been great, because you don't want to be a negative Nancy all the time. But yeah, so those were the challenges I faced, and being at COP has helped. And that is about it. Yeah.
Hello everyone, my name is Nanga. I'm from Mongolia, country between Russia and China. The reason why I'm saying is like that I met lots of people. Oh, you are the first person I met, and then might be in this crowd lots of journalists for the first time hearing about the story of Mongolia. And I would like to share two stories here. The one is my quick observation of last 2 days. And this morning I saw the media center is quite empty, and because of the old leaders gone. And then even in Mongolia, same case. And then from Mongolia, there are 10 journalists sharing one camera person together, following the president of Mongolia. All the coverage is about like, oh, president at that kind of meeting, President Sheikh is this kind, oh, president meet John Kerry, took these photos. It's just like about so glamorous, just like point. It's just didn't say why it's important. Why these many people bring here in a COP, what kind of solutions we solving, what kind of local problem they want to achieve, they want to hide. And this is how media works. Media, they pick in the attention of the people, and then all the attention, that's why we make the changes, right? And then in Mongolia, we never ever been like an attention point in international media. That's why president from the developing country bring in our budget money to lots of journalists to promoting his appearances. And thanks for the EGN, thanks for the Stanley Center, thanks for CCMP Fellowship. I am participating COP as a freelance journalist, sending my stories to local media, and would like to share my story to international media to because Mongolia needs lots of attention. And talking about climate change, this is like completely blank topic in Mongolia because we have lots of problems, inflation, poverty, and how minings, and then climate change may be ranked in like the bottom of the topics for the newsroom grab. And when you're covering the climate change, Mongolia is really vast, really sparsely populated country. About 60% of our population living in Ulaanbaatar city. If you want to talk about climate stories, you need to drive thousands of kilometers away to meet herders and then hearing their stories. These kind of stories happen maybe one or twice a year, maybe about 5 or a few local media can able to handle it. Because producing climate story is costly for the newsroom. Newsroom is like the barely like the meet the ends, barely dealing with the salaries. They just like to borrow money from politicians. That's why they wanted to chasing after all current affairs. And yeah, and then for myself and then ETN giving, it's a second time partnership here. And then I'm a journalist I started working in this industry at the age of 14. And then I do lots of things in this time, starting from radio journalist, ended up like the freelancer in the international media, and writing about lots of variety of topics like business and mining, and now like understanding climate change is really on the edge, need to implementation. Because my hometown is Gobi Desert. I was born in the Gobi Desert and with the Altai Mountain. The nature is like quite similar like in Sharm el-Sheikh, except for the sea, except for the greens, it's just the old desert. And if we didn't implement anything, actual things, and actually my hometown expanded and desert expanded, Mongolia will be all desert in 30 years. That's why we need to understand, instead of tipping point, why climate change is important, explaining to the readers and put human story there. Like lots of people say, oh, you are the Mongolia, tell me about Mongolian story. There's a lot of herders, lots of people and vulnerable people in Mongolia suffering from climate change, like desert drought and Zod. Zod is like the winter natural disaster we're dealing with decades. And then now we have really huge dust storms in North Asia, like in China and Mongolia, and facing those challenges. And people need to write and to share, and then thanks for the EGN, we have the collaboration communities, and then thanks for you guys, this is the story we have locally faced, and then we can together bring those topics need attention into the global audiences.
Thank you, Nanga. Thank you. Thank you, Nanga. Can you hear me? No? Can you hear me? No? Try this one. Hello? There we go. Thank you to our fellows. Hello? Whoa. I do think we have some time for questions. Anyone, please? Any questions from the audience for our fellows? Journalists? Don't be shy. Yes. Please tell us who you are and where you're from.
Hello, my name is Boris. I'm coming from the Netherlands, Amsterdam. We also have floodings, by the way, and also the need of information about climate change. But you, as climate journalists, could you give journalists who are not climate journalists some tips how they can mainstream climate change into their reporting? Thank you.
Okay, just one suggestion from me. It's human interest. So in Sri Lanka, for example, I would start my stories by speaking about the floods, which happen biannually, and sort of incorporate how climate change is causing that. That's how we would mainstream climate journalism, I think, from my point of view.
I have a friend, a journalist friend, as she says, climate change is about everything that we say nowadays. So in Brazil, we report, I would say, we have huge issues with the economic sector, because of climate change. So we can talk about climate change in so many aspects. So the human rights, economics, not so environment, but also consume things. So I think it's just a shift of your point of view to see things, you know, through another perspective. Because I really think climate change can be addressed by any other issues.
Thank you. Yes, in the back, please.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. Goran, project manager for the environmental journalism project in Iraq. Actually, my question to Christine, you mentioned about the data journalism. I believe that, especially for the climate change or environmental issues stories, we need data. We need to have to strengthen our story with the data. But I believe for Iraqi journalists and all over Iraq, there is a problem with the access to information and data. So we have not only for environmental issues, stories, we have like an issue for all the other stories without data, because we don't have like the access to data easily from the government, even from some of the humanitarian and development organizations. So since you mentioned about that, what is your advice when a journalist faces accessing information about any kind of data that related to the environmental journalism?
When we had this problem of not being granted access to any official source, we had to look for another sources of information, and we rely a lot on universities and researchers, what they are doing. So for us, luckily, we still have this open platform about deforestation in the case that I was talking about. But we also had, during the past 4 years, we had a lot of independent groups creating their platforms as well. So nowadays we have at least 3 more organizations that are looking at the deforestation rates with their own technologies. For example, there is a satellite, there is a company that's called Planet. I don't know if you know that. It's a European company, and it gives free access to satellite imagery. So they have a lot of projects, and they have a project now that shows that open the data about deforestation around the world, around the tropical forests in the world. So we have to look to another sources, and not only Planet. It's just it. Planet, if you type Planet satellite data, you will give, I think it's Norwegian company. So we have to look to alternative sources, and I'm sure that even if in your country you don't find those people, you can find in the United States, you can find in other, in UK. There are a lot of people that had to flee their countries, and they are looking at their home countries as well. So my advice would be, make a broader search of information.
Thank you, Chris. Please.
Hello, I'm Daniel from Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I want to ask any of you what should be the difference between an environmental journalist and an environmental activist, if there should be any difference.
Okay, I'll start. And I'll give you an answer from my trainer, Mr. David. He said that we're not supposed to be sensationalists. That is unnecessarily sensationalizing the story, but being really balanced, telling it as it really is, not being an alarmist, because, we do have, and if you're an alarmist and people get to find out, then they won't take you seriously subsequently. But when you do provide all the sides to the story, and of course, as we've been trained, leave the readers to decide, although some people, there's a new thinking that journalists should be opinionated, but I really don't think that's the way to go. I think you should simply tell it as it is, tell every side, you know. And if you want to be an activist, then you can be an activist outside journalism, but then if you're going to practice proper journalism, there are ethics, there are ways to do it, and we should just stick to it. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Sorry, guys, I'm very chatty. I would tell you, Daniel, 10 years ago, I went to UK to see, in a fellowship as well, to see how the British media was covering climate change issues. In my mind, in my opinion at that time, to learn something from them. And I saw that all the media outlets in UK were doing the same as us. I didn't find any good, wow, so different advice. And then in 2010, BBC and Guardian, they launched a new guide for their journalists regarding climate change and regarding environmental. So I think these premises of journalism being neutral, that I personally think never existed, it's been falling apart in sometimes, and that's good somehow. For example, for environment, we know the truth. We know that climate change exists. So as Guardian and BBC did 2 years ago, they stopped listening to deniers. So this thing of, I have to listen to someone that says, climate change exists. Oh, climate change doesn't exist because I am, as a journalist, I have the obligation to hear the other side. So they don't have it anymore because they know climate change, we can't treat with this denying thing anymore. So I think if it is being an activist, I don't know, but I think it's being, I'm being responsible with my viewers, no, my audience.
Christine, may I add something? Because I remember that Ricardo, who is Argentinian like you are, Ricardo Grassi, was always saying that being a journalist means being an activist because you change reality. So he had something to say. Ricardo, please, if you can hear me. You are muted. You are muted, Ricardo. You are muted.
Where to be muted? It doesn't happen to me too much. Thank you, Max. Thank you, Daniel, for your question. Probably it's a particularly Argentine question because of our history. But I wanted to add something to this. Paul explained very well the difference because each one has a different role. So accuracy is our duty, and research, so that we need to research, and we need to convey things in a way that are accurate, credible, triple checked, because this is a very sensitive issue and there's a lot of fake news and a lot of disinformation, very well organized and with a lot of money. But at the same time, our profession is a service. This has been rather forgotten by the usual practice of most media, and I will talk later about the media organizations as an issue in itself. But we couldn't practice our job related to climate change, environmental issues, and link it to the priorities that each country has without passion. So probably I wouldn't call it to become an activist, so though in concrete terms we take with passion an issue that affects all humanity today, and we need to see in what more effective way we can implement our job. And at a certain point, both things meet. I mean, we will not be able to perform properly our role on this specific issue without a sort of militant attitude. So I don't see any contradiction, but just to have very clear the difference. Our duty is to inform properly. Our duty is to look for things that are heavily uncovered. Our duty is to serve the people and to know that information is a public good. I will stop here at this moment, but just I wanted to inject this. This is the attitude, my attitude as a journalist throughout history, not only because of on climate change, though this makes me feel probably old, but I was in the Earth Summit in Rio de Janeiro in June 1992, covering the issue with passion. Because with passion, without passion, we go nowhere. Passion and accuracy.
So you were in 1992 in Rio, and probably it want to be something like an intergenerational dialogue, so communicating across generations and across cultures. So going back to generations, we have here Alexandria Villaseñor, if you can join us over there, who is since the beginning with the Fridays for Future, and she's the founder of Earth Uprising. So what's the framing? How do you look at what we're saying here at media from your viewpoint, your perspective of the youth, the young generations who are really trying to change what we are doing here at the COP?
Of course. So first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I've had a really great time hearing your perspectives and opinions on this as well. And yeah, I think that I first just want to start off with saying that I got involved in climate activism when I was 13 years old back in 2019 with the climate strike movement. And I was a lead organizer of the climate strikes in New York City. And one thing I was really paying attention to at the time was just how much of a big impact the media had on our movement. Because it was in 2019 when the IPCC, the year before 2019 when the IPCC report came out. And that was really when media started to change around educating people. And with that science, the activism, there was a huge change in public's awareness. And I noticed just how the media, when educating people, was bringing people into the movement. And there needed to be a place for those people to go. And that was our movement. But one thing that I found as well within media was just how important it was that the youth themselves were the ones telling the story and given the platform to tell their story through media. Because at the time, there would be journalists and news organizations that would cover our movements, and they would cover the wrong information, the wrong message that was actually more harmful, even if they meant it in a way that was good. And that was why it's important to include the youth voice and give them the opportunity to share their own message. And I also want to add that my organization, Earth Uprising International, has a media portion of our organization that focuses on giving young people the platform firsthand so they can write from their own stories. Because when you're hearing from someone who's being impacted by the climate crisis directly through media and they're sharing in their own words, it makes a huge difference.
Thank you. So James, any questions or for?
So what do we think about, in terms of, we've heard the youth perspective, are we, as journalists, do we think we're giving enough time and using the youth as sources enough in our stories? I mean, there have been some complaints that we haven't. Are there ways that maybe that we could do that better? Nanga.
Yeah, in terms of the climate change, Mongolian youth is really close to what's the climate change happening, what they actually think it's really matter. And the Mongolian population, maybe like 70% of Mongolian population under age of 40. and we have strong, huge population of the youth people. And I remember last year, during the COP, COP 26, there's one girl who's sharing her story about how youth initiated the activities, about the youth engagement and those situations. The traditional media, they didn't care about like what the young people doing. They just like, oh, there's kids just playing around. The climate change is kind of cool stuff. But the changes are happening. The young people, like around 20s and 30s, they running as a journalist, running a media. They actually covering and supporting, using as a social media, TikTok and Facebook. There's a huge wave and a huge media campaign to raising awareness about climate change. That time, people actually thinking young people has right, have to make changes because of the supporting each other, using as a young people and young journalists and working, collaborating. After that, and then gradually traditional media, the old editors in the newsroom, paying attention, oh, this is the topic we should cover.
I'd just like to add something to that. The other Nigerian journalists here at the COP are all young people. So you see young people covering young people. They actually are interested in doing that. And climate, issues around climate, if you hear people talking about it in Nigeria, they're usually young people, they're the young people. So it's really something that has caught on among the young people. And since you now have a lot of young journalists who are interested in climate change reporting, they're giving a lot of attention to it. And that was even part of my focus here, you know, to actually be at almost every youth engagement that we have at the COP and give them that good coverage. That's it from me.
I will just say, I would just like to add that as a journalism educator who teaches at the Graduate School of Journalism in Berkeley, as I mentioned before, we've seen more and more interest each year from young students, well, they're in their mid-20s, say, who realize that they care about climate change and other environmental issues, and they see the path forward to make a difference through journalism, and through traditional, fact-based, scientifically accurate journalism, and I think that's very encouraging. We now have, every year we have so much demand to be in our class that we have to, that the students have to apply for it. We had 35 applications last year, and we can only take something like 12 or 14 students. So I think that's a real testament to the interest that young people have in journalism and in climate journalism. And I just want to say, I think this is a really underappreciated need out there, is to teach more climate journalists. This is something we've been wanting to do for many years. I know we have some journalists here in the audience who have taught at university. It's kind of a specialized field, climate journalism, and we need more specialized education in that. And that's something for anyone out there looking for a good project or something to support. I think if we had more climate journalism educators in universities, in journalism schools, that can make a really big difference in a lot of people's lives. Yep. Any other comments out there? Any other thoughts people want to share from the screen?
Thank you, but I'm waiting because there's little time remaining, I think, and I will have to wrap up things at the end. So I just remain. Thank you, James.
All right, my name is David Akana. I am an EGN trainer at this conference. So I was wondering if there's room for 2 more questions, then I'll just ask our panelists. If you would, when we do an inward look, well, we mostly do an outward-looking sort of analysis with respect to the challenges that we face as journalists. But if you do an inward-looking analysis in terms of what we are doing well and what we are not doing well, Maybe I'd just like to ask any panelists to just suggest 2 more things that we would have to do well in terms of our coverage and our reporting. We have a certain model of reporting that we have out there. But moving forward, if you're really going to have traction and get readers and get young people to read our stories, what is it that we have to do differently? Is it more data journalism? Is it more straightforward reporting? Is it more features? Any 2 things that you think we should do more, or 2 things that we should discontinue, what would that be?
I think something that we definitely need to do is mobilize social media more. I've noticed that, my stories don't get a lot of hits sometimes, but if I put it on my Instagram story with a short description, then more people have read it. And I know that, most of the majority of the demographic on Instagram is young people. So I definitely think that there's like a lot of untapped potential where social media is concerned. And I definitely think, I know it's considered cringy and like immature or whatever, but we have to face the facts and get with the times. So I definitely think that, even platforms like TikTok and all that can be used, because we have to understand we are here to disseminate information, and we have to use whatever means are keeping up with the times to do that. That's just one suggestion, but yeah.
A second one will be to do more explainers. There's a carbon markets initiative right now. What is a carbon market initiative? What really is it? How is it? And then how is it relevant to me? I think those are 2 things that we can incorporate into our writing, and it will make a difference. Thank you.
I would say make it visual. Make maps, make infographics, make charts. It's much easier to our audience to understand, even and make it funny. No, I don't know if it's funny, it's the word, but it's make it fun, using expressions that they use, using a language that is natural for them.
Yes. Okay, there is another question directly for Adeline from UNESCO, right?
Can I add something real quick? Just really quickly, I wanted to say one thing that we also need to see more in media is talking about the intersection between different issues, because climate justice is racial justice, climate justice is health justice, climate justice is a women's rights issue. And so when we're talking about different issues out there, we also need to incorporate climate change in it, because all of them are so intersected.
Yeah, I had one last question maybe to UNESCO.
Yeah, I had just a quick question, because we've listened so much about the need for more climate journalism education and this need to reinforce the networks and the cooperation between the journalists. But in our time as well, like what we see is that actually every journalist should actually become as well a kind of climate change journalist. So I wonder if we also if we shouldn't as well think about making climate change a compulsory course for every journalist across the world. What do you think? Because right now we're talking about having specialist journalists working on climate change, but isn't it actually the duty of every journalist to actually report on climate change?
Mm-hmm.
Hello, James. I don't have much to say. I just felt I need to represent Africa, where I work for EJN as the point man for EJN. And a lot of these things that we're talking about here, I'm seeing them, especially when you talk about the youth, when most of my generation and the generation before really didn't care much about environment, or we didn't even know much about environment. In the media, we didn't used to tell stories about environment, not unless there is a disaster. But this is changing now, and you find young people are more, intentioned to talk about environment. And for our EJN programming, we've seen this need. And what we do mostly in our webinars, we incorporate, we bring in university students to join our, and mostly who have journalism, they have journalism clubs, they have radio stations for school, and we bring them, and they're able to tell these stories. And I think even the media houses mostly in Kenya, where I come from, have realized that they need to speak more to the youths. And for the largest media house in East and Central Africa, that's The Nation. Actually, they have asked all their reporters to have TikTok accounts because that's where the young people are, TikTok and Instagram. When you come to a conference like this, file a story, write for the daily newspaper, for the digital, but have something fun, as my friend Paul says, an explainer that goes into TikTok and Instagram. And I think this is working well, and we're trying to see even ownership of government projects like planting and nurturing trees. People are taking these more. People are realizing, like now we're facing the biggest or largest drought in so many years. We've lost about 4.3 million people in need of food today in Kenya alone this year. We've lost a lot of livestock, we've lost a lot of wildlife, but people never used to connect this to climate change. But we hear more and more, and it's mostly because of the work that is being done by media. Thank you.
Okay, we are almost running out of time. We have a short 1 minute video to show because there are 7 scientists, because we are talking a lot of media. But the real problem is how to make scientific communication easy to be understood. So there are 7 scientists now that recorded the video for us, and they are looking at the video, so they are with us, and they would like to learn together with us how to communicate in a better way, or maybe they are already able to. So if you can show this final video and the final goodbye to everyone. 1 second, let's look at the video and we go.
Doom mood? Many are feeling hopeless about climate change. It's because of those who stubbornly cast doubts on solutions to it. But we are similarly stubborn. We bring a strong no to doom moods, showing why we do not need to feel helpless. The doom mood makers count on endless financial resources, but we have something they don't. We count on our unbreakable trust on humans' creative resilience.
All right, I think that's a wrap, folks. I want to thank very much our panelists one more time for joining us, including our journalists and our youth delegate, please. And thank you all in the audience for joining us this afternoon and on the live stream. I hope this is the start of a longer conversation about journalism and education, because we really have our work cut out for us. Thank you to everyone.